They often say you can't create the future you want without first understanding the past. Yet in Nigeria, we're often quite dismissive of and unwilling to engage with the past. There's a treasure trove of information about Nigeria's past, hiding in the molding pages of newspapers, sitting down in physical archives across the nation, sometimes simply sitting in old warehouses and storerooms. Much of this information hasn't been made digital in any way, and in time will disappear, forever inaccessible in a digital age, and with it, our history. We are on the brink of an irredeemable loss. Today, we'll speak with someone who doesn't think that we should let that happen, and who, with his team, is working to make sure that we don't lose our past. Welcome to Tech into the Future. Join us as we try to save our past.
Hello and welcome to Tech into the Future, where we talk about everything that's happening in technology and how it affects you. My name is Ngozi Maduka-Dozier. I look after Android partnerships for West Africa at Google.
My name is Tomiwa Ladikomo. I'm the CEO of Techabal, a digital publication that's been covering African tech for the last decade. Alongside Ngozi, I will be your guide into the world of tech in Nigeria, Africa, and the world.
So Nigeria has a very interesting relationship with history. You know, there was first the elimination of history as a subject from federal schools in 2009. Yes. Although it came back in 2022, but you have to ask why it went in the first place, right?
13 years.
13 years.
Yeah.
So the question is, in those 13 years, I wonder what the students were learning about history.
Or not learning.
Or not learning about history. I think it's also interesting because I went to primary and secondary school here in Nigeria, as I believe you did as well.
I did.
And we don't do a great job of discussing the military role as an example, or the Civil War, etc. And so that relationship with our history, I find interesting.
It's challenging because it then means that you have a world in which, in order to understand, how did Nigeria become the Nigeria it is today, you have to actively go looking for that information. And if you haven't come from a home where books are a big part of the tradition, or you have parents who are really going to push you to it, most people are really poorly educated about the history of Nigeria and about where it is that we've come from.
When we talk about, in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've come from. Yeah. Clearly, this is, I don't want to say why we don't know where we're going, but,
it really is a big part of it. Nigeria, whether in private or public sector, has decades and decades of history where we've made a series of really strategic decisions that have gone really badly for us as a country. We are nowhere near as developed. If you look at the history of Nigeria in the 70s, Nigeria was at par with Korea, with Malaysia, with South Korea, with Malaysia, in terms of a per capita income basis. And so somewhere between then and now, we've definitely gone very, very seriously off the rails. And you wonder, without sort of understanding what it is that went wrong, without being able to look at our history and say, what decisions did leaders make? What decisions did we make as a country? How did we get here? Even things like our relationships to ourselves as tribes or as states within the country, the formation of the states, what drove these things? And I think what's really interesting is that as we get into a more digital world where people access everything, primarily via the internet, primarily via digital platforms, it becomes more and more difficult for young people to access this information because not all of it is on the internet. So I wonder how a younger generation actually
So that's actually a great point, because you're right. If we haven't done a good job, first of all, we haven't done a good job of discussing it, even as we still have generations that lived it, still here with us. And if they haven't actually documented it, then there's not even much to archive. For the ones that have been documented, then the question is, how are they being archived and preserved? Because when our kids then want to access history and grandpa is not around to tell them, then where do they go for that bit of history?
I just had the image of like this TikTok generation trying to find out
Yes.
Nigerian history via TikTok.
Right.
I mean, like, there's always sort of people innovating, and there's going to be somebody who's going to create a TikTok channel and try to educate people in Nigerian history. But if you want depth, if you want
Exactly.
like a richness, then you need a lot more than 30-second videos of someone telling
Exactly.
you. So what had happened with the Diagbon was
Exactly.
It's not
And
really
it's-
going to work.
And it
Yeah.
has to be not only just long form, right? It has to be different versions, of different perspectives.
Exactly, because
of
you
the
can't have one narrative
Exactly.
about where it is that we've come from.
Exactly.
Now, I think today's episode is a little bit close to my heart. I've had the pleasure of working for two major Nigerian newspapers. I've worked for The Guardian. I also worked for This Day for a while. And so I know that within the pages of newspapers, we capture Nigeria's movement day to day. And I mean, you can argue about sort of like the accuracy or the perspectives or the bias, but like you said, the great thing about newspapers is, like this newspaper captured it from this perspective, that newspaper captured it from that
Right,
perspective,
yes.
that newspaper, so whether that newspaper is actually biased towards that man and that one is biased towards that woman, you get a range of different perspectives because they're all covering the same things that are happening on a daily basis. And I think like that's a really sort of rich perspective of Nigerian history. And so the question about that is it available online for this TikTok generation or further I don't even know. Imagine what in 5 years, how are kids going to be consuming information? In 5 years,
Right.
like what platforms are we going to be on? But you're still going to need.
You're still going to need, and even just imagine people that are interested in the country or in the continent, right? I'm sitting somewhere in Australia and I'm thinking to myself, well, there's this country I've heard about, Nigeria. What do you find, when you go on?
Where is their history?
Where's their history?
Where do I
Exactly.
find the movements? And I think it's like the movements on a day-to-day
Yes.
basis. What happened when that happened, and then what happened afterwards?
And then who sets the context, right? So now I will tell you, you read the Chimamanda, Adichie books, but truth of the matter is that's storytelling. That's not necessarily news, right?
Yeah.
And so yes, she helps us set a context. Like then that's what's in my mind when I think about the 60s and the 50s that I wasn't here for. I literally picture whatever Chimamanda told me.
I mean, and to be fair, she did a ton of research. She did really great work in that book. But if you're going to write something about that, if you're going to like create a video about that, if you're going to do anything of any depth to discuss that period, you're going to, again, need to go to the archives and create
Exactly.
a proper, like, look at the record in clear. It's like that thing where it's like, I know the word, but if I'm going to write the word in certain context, I'm still going to go back to the dictionary because I want to make sure that it actually makes sense. And the same thing, there's no way you're going to create, if you're going to create a new work of literature about that time period, if you're going to create a non-fiction thing, if you're writing, it was your dad's birthday recently, happy birthday to him. You want to write his history. It's like great that he's told you his story, but you're going to need other references to qualify. Yes, this is actually how it happened.
Indeed.
He remembered that it happened on March 15th, but actually the record shows it was in November.
Exactly.
And so you need records. And the question that we're going to discuss today is, will those records be available for the future?
Don't go anywhere. We're going to answer that question when we get back.
Welcome back to Tech into the Future on Arise News. I'm excited about today's guest. He's an old colleague and one of the most incredible storytellers I know. Fuad Lawal has worked across a wide range of digital media platforms, including Party Jollof and Pulse. He's the former editor-in-chief of Zikoko, where he conceived a series of money diaries called Naira Life that changed the way young people think about their relationship with money and their careers. He also led an incredible journey called Jollof Road, where he and a group of young people traveled West Africa in a bus for 80 days, visiting all 14 English and French-speaking West African countries, creating the kind of contemporary documentary content about Africa that normally we wait for Oyibo to come and do for us. Today, Fuad is project lead at Vistanium, a platform that's telling contemporary Nigerian stories. And more pertinent to today's conversation, he's Chief Archivist at Archiving. Welcome, Fuad.
I'm going to pretend I haven't seen you in a long time. Long time no see.
Good. Let's jump right into it. So, as we've already told the audience, your background is in writing, editorial, photography, video, just storytelling broadly. So, what brought newspapers, and more specifically, archiving newspapers, to your attention?
Precisely that, actually. Context. Whenever you want to explore any form of storytelling in the context of Nigeria, you need like historical resources, like context to like help you build your story or the world your story is situated in. And just the lack of access to these things, the fact that you cannot do a quick search and find something from like Nigerian history to like help you enrich your story or to help you build context, just means that like storytelling in itself is even more difficult. And there are all kinds of use cases and all kinds of people who have those types of problems. You walk in a newsroom and you're trying to figure out like something that happened in Nigeria in 1956. You can't find anything. You're trying to learn about Obudukatu Ranch. You can't find anything except maybe like what was in the papers in the 2000s. When in fact there were elaborate editorials about Obudukatu Ranch from like 1957. So the lack of context to even like do knowledge production in 2024 is what makes is how I ended up like with newspapers. Interestingly, I first found out about archives while we were on Jollof Road. When we entered Nigeria through Niger, Sokoto, I found this Manafodio archives and discovered that they had newspapers from like the 80s, and they were like, oh yeah, every national archive has old newspapers, and that was the beginning.
So tell me, do you have, beyond this one, is there any other like personal history or experience that makes this a particularly interesting area of work for you?
Yes. I have a New York Times subscription, right? And it's because every time I have a question, I'm almost sure to find the answer in the New York Times. Now, that shouldn't be a bad thing, except that when I need to find nuanced perspectives on like things I'm curious about, I like to think I'm a fairly curious person.
Okay. So, having decided that this is important work and it's good use of your time, how did you go about making it come to life?
Okay, so first of all, it was accidentally discovering that we actually have archives. Okay. So Nigerians say stuff like, oh, we don't keep anything in Nigeria. That's false.
Okay.
The problem is always the quality of the story. There's effort, but the quality of the continuity is always the problem. And so I found archives.
Sorry, just break that down for the audience a little bit. So what does that mean?
Okay, so Nigeria inherited a law from the British that requires that every publisher send a copy of their newspaper to the libraries, to the public libraries. And what that means is that you go to libraries and you can find stuff from like 1926.
That's libraries in the UK or libraries here?
In Nigeria. There are about 6 of them across the country. It was started by Kenneth Dike in UI. That was the first one, National Archives in the 1950s. Shout out to Kenneth Dike. And the question became, if we go looking, what are we going to find? So we picked a focus period, 1960 till 2010. That's 18,627 days. And we went looking across 3 libraries, and we found 97% of papers from that period, like at least one newspaper a day from that period.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating.
And so it's like, so this much exists. What if we try to like actually digitize it and make sure it doesn't rot?
So let me ask, in what condition were the newspapers that you found?
Oh yeah, very horrible, right? And it's interesting because it's not even a lack of effort from the actual librarians.
Right.
For a lot of them, they guard it like it's treasure, right? Mm. But there's only so much they can do to deteriorating paper.
Right.
Even the best quality newsprint has like 50 years of like
shelf life.
Shelf life.
Interesting.
So it was like finding those newspapers and saying, let's figure out how to digitize them, and then realize, you cannot use regular scanners to digitize large format papers.
Yes.
So you need to buy a large format scanner. Where do you buy that? Oh yes, it's this company in Germany. We have to register. And next thing you know, I'm quitting my job to do it full time.
Wow, amazing.
My finances are saying otherwise, but that's not today is not for my Naira life.
Yeah.
So it's funny because that actually leads me to the question about how one is able to commercialize this, right? So Yes, I understand that it's an important mission.
Yeah.
I personally thank you. I think, I was saying when I was, prepping for this interview, it occurred to me that my mom died 24 years ago, and I can't actually find the paper that, her obituary was published in, because if you didn't keep it, then it's kind of just gone.
Yeah.
And so we thank you, but beyond us thanking you on the show, how do you make money from this?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it's a question we are also trying to answer. So currently, if you go to archiving, right, and you search for...
Sorry, archiving. So it's archivi.ng.
We thought we were bright, and then it turned out to be... Yeah, so if you go there and search for your mom, you might find something.
Wow.
Currently, we have over 50,000 pages live. It's from a young, small newspaper, PM News, right? So 1994 to 2010.
I'm going to pause you. So just clarify for us, how come you have PM News?
So, first of all, I grew up reading PM News. Ojolagba commute every day. So that's just like full circle moments for me. We managed to convince the publisher of PM News to allow us to digitize his entire archives, right, and make it accessible. One of the things we also made very clear is that, look, we are preserving your archives. They survived the fire in the 2000s. That's how they still have archives. But even if a scenario comes where there is commercial opportunity, in the spirit of like good faith, like we are going to bring it to the table before we like commercialize or anything. And that's pretty much the deal we've been going to publishers with, the ones we have access to, where we are telling them, allow us to digitize the archives. We know that the media is a bloody game, zero sum. Let us worry about the costs of digitizing it, right? And then when commercial opportunities open up, we'll bring you back, and then we'll figure out how to split and all of that.
So you haven't figured out the commercial model yet?
Not entirely.
Okay. And how are you funding this so far?
Strangers on the internet.
Amazing.
Who I am hoping will also see this. So we've raised roughly 50,000 from just random people on the internet.
$50,000?
The smallest single donation is 1,000 naira, and the largest single donation is $25,000.
And what is it? A GoFundMe? Is it a?
It's like so. We actually have like a donate page on the website.
Okay.
Where we're just
if someone wanted to support you, they could go to the website and...
Yes, there's a giant donate button, it's hard to miss. And all kinds of people, right? We've seen like, there's this old white couple who lived in Lagos in the 60s, and they asked to get on a call and were geeking out about their life in Lagos in the 60s and showing old papers, sent us a few. So it's all kinds of people we are seeing are finding use in this. It's also, interestingly, in October last year, someone found the 100-year remembrance ad that was taken out for her ancestor in 1995. But about commercialization, it's going to require a lot of creativity, especially because the way you would approach commercializing this is almost the same way you approach commercializing information, like journalism.
Right.
And when you think of it in the context of Africa, that B2C commercialization model is not entirely robust and sustainable. But it's also like figuring out the other creative ways that we can rethink what it means to like digitize papers.
You're saying now people don't have the money to pay for subscriptions for it?
Surprise me. Surprise me.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and so what that is doing is forcing us to think like from first principles about like other ways to like extract opportunities from these archives to sustain the work. Okay. And one of it is thinking of it less as newspapers with information and more as training data, for example.
Right.
For AI data sets. Exactly. We're going to come back to that, but I just want to get a bit of the scope of the project so far. So you said you have about 50,000 pages
live,
and that's mostly PM News, or all PM News?
All of PM News from 1994 to 2010.
Do you have any other papers or any other
we have
publications?
The Republic. The Republic used to be published in by Otumba Ajayi. I found him in a magazine, by the way, random. From the 80s, late 80s, it was very, very finance focused because he was in finance. We are currently, so another thing again is that we have access to a lot of magazines. We have at least 48,000 pages that are not yet public. And we literally had to assemble a legal team at archiving to figure out what are the things that would need to happen for us to like take these
Public.
this public. So it's
So, just for clarity here,
Yeah.
you're saying theoretically you might have in the back of your house, or somebody might have come and dump on the back of your doorstep, 50 years worth of, say, this day.
yeah.
But before you scan it and make it public,
Yeah.
you have to get into some kind of agreement
Yes.
or legal position
Yes.
with this day so that
Yes.
they don't sue you out of existence when they come
so,
live.
so it's interesting, right? Because it's like so newspapers are categorized as literary works under Nigeria's copyright law, also inherited from the British. But the interesting thing is there are like very, very gray areas. Our copyright law has not yet evolved so much. So there are a lot of gray areas that we can quite frankly exploit. But maybe it's still because there's still the kumbayaness of it, like, guys, let us do this thing. Like, it literally
Still
is
properly.
your name on the article.
Right. So ultimately, that's the goal, right?
Yes.
I'd imagine is to get as many of the newspapers as
Yes.
they were available then and
yeah.
are still up now, up and archived.
Yeah, 1859 from as like in a decade,
1859.
right? I want people to search for. I'm actually not in a decade, like next 5 to 6 years. But I want people to search for 1859 and find the Iwe. I want them to search for 1926 and find Daily Times. Yeah.
What have been the biggest challenges so far?
So it's two things. It's first of all access. The world that I've spent the last decade of my life has been one where like the ultimate KPI is speed, and now like I'm having to like deal with bureaucracy. Come back next week, email someone with a deck, print the deck and take it to their office, wait around in the reception for like just a word I'm no longer used to, mostly because of the custodians of the archives that we currently that we need access to. The second problem, of course, is money. Money is, I feel like even my access problem would disappear if I had a lot of money.
Fair enough.
And it's also this thing where because it's a non-profit, yes, we do get money from like, we've come this far, like 100% because of like private individuals on the internet, but we also need like a lot of money. Like over the next 3 years, we need to figure out where to find at least $500,000 to like even just fund like the work. And that's like even modest, quite frankly.
Okay, and so what does success on this project look like for you?
First of all, it stops being a project because that's one of the things that happens this year. It goes from being a project to being like this organism in itself that just continues to evolve. But when I think about
Self-sustaining business?
Yeah.
Or,
Right.
So when I think about a decade from now, I imagine a future where like we have already built like the most dependable source of public information about Africa. And I walk back. When we collect so much knowledge, one of the forcing functions that just accumulating that much knowledge does is that it forces us to facilitate knowledge production, right? New knowledge. So whether it is people working in film, whether it is people working in journalism, for example, it's like we tech about, people think tech started in Yaba, right? It's like, what does it look like to actually like see how those stories are covered over the decades?
Right.
It's also the fact that a few weeks ago I was in Ghana and I was speaking to like researchers at the University of Ghana, and it was the same problem, lack of access to archives. And one of the things that becomes very, very clear is that as our work continues to expand, almost inevitably, it is going to break beyond Nigeria because
Right.
it's a continental problem.
Right,
Also,
it is.
like especially sub-Saharan Africa.
So you're talking about the vision for your project, and you
Yeah.
say $500,000. Was that the number you gave?
Like to just get
scratch
us
the
going.
surface. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Where in your mind, like, who are your dream partners, right? I have like who would you like to get in front of today?
Yeah. So big tech for starters.
Yeah.
So think about like the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts, because primarily they are the people who have the resources to like figure out, like to help us extract the most value from this data. Like even just hold. AWS bills almost murdered me last year. I literally get a bill and just start having palpitations. So big tech is definitely one part. Also like actual like institutions of research and knowledge production. one of the things that we are quickly learning is that what we are literally doing is creating unlimited utility. We cannot, in one lifetime, make the most use of the archives ourselves, right? And so, as much as possible, we need to find people who care deeply about knowledge. That's a recurring theme we are finding with people who even care about the work. They need to care about knowledge and how it advances like us as a civilization, as a species. So ideal partners with people who care about that as individuals, as institutions all over the world. Because interestingly, like we're getting like researchers from Australia, we're getting someone from Biden's government saying, oh, I like this, right? Because like, even if you are not in Africa and you're remotely curious about Africa, you can't find out
real data about it.
Right.
I mean, let me just, we don't have a lot of time left. I'm just going to, on that point, in terms of data availability and data usage, we talked a little bit about sort of AI earlier on. So we're going into an AI world. How do you see this data being used in that world? What does it contribute to? Because a big question and concern for people is that in an AI world, Africa's data is missing. There's a big sort of like Africa hole in the data. And how does that shape perceptions of the continent? How does that shape perceptions of our history? How do you think this contributes to that?
So I think of AI as having like 3 legs currently. There's the infrastructure leg, so chips, right? There's the compute, which is like the LLMs and all of that, and there's the data leg.
Large language models.
Yeah.
For our audience, yes.
Yeah, and there's the data leg, right? You ask ChatGPT a question about Nigeria today, like old stuff, and it barely has anything, right? And it's just simple. It just has nothing to work with, right? And so when you think about all these like data sets and how underrepresented like African data is, like the whole is massive, and everyone says, oh, we have bigger priorities. Like, oh yes, we should grow more corn. Yes, we should grow more corn, but like even by the time we are
grow
full,
more what?
Corn, like just
corn.
food. Everybody always there's this thing where everybody feels like there's a tendency for people to say, oh, if it doesn't directly feed people, like
let me tell you, we say the same thing every week. That we actually have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So yes, we should actually grow corn, but we should also do the things that are necessary to preserve our history. Because here's the fear and here's the concern: is that if we don't tell our own stories, somebody else will tell it for us. And then the biggest fear is that AI would then generate what Nigeria looked like.
They'll tell you a new story.
Exactly.
You will hear new things about Nigeria's history.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us, Fuad. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
We wish you success in your work. And for those in the audience, you can see his website on screen. And if you'd like to support, go to archive.ng. And thank you, Fuad.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to Tech into the Future, where we just had quite an interesting interview with archiving. Quite fascinating. I think what I can't wait for is to be able to go online and research Nigeria dating all the way back to 1859 and to find articles that were written in that time.
No, I love it. And at the beginning of the show, we talked about the fact that you need multiple perspectives.
Yes.
So the thing that I'm really excited about is the day when I can go there and I can find the Disney archive and the Guardian archive and
Vanguard,
I can find
and the rest of all of them.
Everything, And I think a really fascinating thing is think about how many newspapers are no longer published. And I think those actually might be some of the most important archives for them to get.
Exactly.
It's the ones where, they
don't exist anymore.
They don't exist anymore. And what that means is that from a commercial perspective, over time, the value of keeping the archive to the person who is no longer making commercial value from that paper starts to decline. So I hope that if you're in the audience and you found this conversation interesting, you reach out to Fuad and the archiving crew, because it is really, really critical to have that history digitized. I think it's an exciting project for me. It's a really interesting one.
It is very interesting. Like I said, if we did not preserve the actual physical copy of my mom's obituary in that specific newspaper, then we wouldn't have access to it again. And that is just one of many examples. I also think that one of the things that would be interesting to see is not just us archiving information. I think data is so important to all the decision making that has to be made in the future, right? Not just where we're coming from, but you also want to see the trajectory of growth. So in addition to archiving, there actually also has to be some level of extrapolating all that information and putting it
building
in
on top of it.
Yes,
We
building
didn't actually
actual
have
data.
enough time. That was a place we wanted to get into with Fuad.
Yes.
You know, what's really interesting about projects like this is like it becomes a new baseline for you to build new things
Exactly,
upon. And so it's somebody like actually being able to access 60 years of newspapers or 100 years of newspapers and then actually be able to say, well, I'm going to go look for patterns within those histories.
Yeah.
I'm going to go look for, you know, new correlations that nobody else has made because I can actually like sift and filter and process through all of that information in a digitized way. And you can build new companies on the basis of the work that's they're doing.
You might even be surprised to find some patterns that already exist that we don't know about, right? Because nobody's actually taking note of these things. So I feel like the work he's doing is not just integral, it's a starting point that I'm hoping that a lot of other entities will build upon. I also hope that he finds partnerships and funding.
And the funding, yeah.
You know, to really make this a success. So I guess that's one person or one story that we'll continue to check in on.
Yeah, we'll continue to check in on. I think maybe as a final point, it's a really important thing that he said, look, this is a Pan-African opportunity. And it's like Nigeria is not the only country that's not doing a great job of archiving its past. I think when we talk about AI, when we talk about large language models, when we talk about sort of like the data sets, again, that construct the AI that will build our future, you really need to feed it with rich information about our past. Otherwise, we're going to get to a future where they will tell you anything about how the Nigerian Civil War happened. They will tell you anything about the origin of Nigeria. They will
take it one step
like,
further. If you try now, right, to do certain searches, you'll be amazed the images that pop up, right? Because they don't have any reference points. AI is not magic. AI is actually going back to look at information and data, right?
Information,
exactly. And so you're right, there is a big void that exists now, but again, what we do today determines what tomorrow would look like. And if we don't start making some of these key decisions, then what's going to happen is that when you do any of those searches, it would be either a void, meaning that it will tell you that we can't come up with that image because we don't have it, or it will legit just make up its own image of what, you know,
I mean, and based on whatever Western information it's been given.
Exactly.
Because, I thought one of the really fascinating things that Fuad mentioned was that sometimes the information about Nigeria he could find in the New York Times archives. And so, again, this is the problem, is if you don't preserve your past, then somebody else will create some version of it for you. So we wish Fuad and the archiving team all the luck in the work that they're doing. Please go and support them. Thank you for joining us today on Tech into the Future. Join us next time as we take you into the business and the impact of tech in Africa, how it's changing the world and how it's changing your world. Stay tuned to Rise News.